So this is how our lab's going to run today. I'm going to write down some questions on the whiteboard that you all generate. So think about what was it that I came here to learn, or what is the thing that we should definitely talk about, because this is important for people to hear. I'll write that down. We'll start figuring out. Well, let's start with this and then go to that and work our way through that list. I will write some tips or answers on that board, all those poignant things that we want to take away. And then we're just going to keep repeating that. Hopefully right before 2 o'clock, I will say, ooh, are there anything that we haven't got to yet? Or are there any new questions that came up? I'll reach out with you and we'll hit that. Wednesday mornings, Lane Sunwell at UW Milwaukee is also doing active teaching labs. If you are transitioning to Canvas, Adam, you might want to watch the live stream on UW Milwaukee because they are transitioning to Canvas right now. So all of their topics are very Canvas related this semester. And you can find out more there if you just do a search for active teaching lab at UW Milwaukee.
And Lane is a graduate of this active teaching lab program.
We don't have graduates, but if we did,
So really it's kind of, he's one of John's proteges, so he was like,
How many years do you have to come to graduate?
That's a good question.
This
This
is
is
the
the
first
first
time
time
I've
I've heard
heard
of others. And I'm not sure I would sign anyone's diploma. Oh, another thing I want to point out is what's that? Is that yours?
Oh, I brought that for you.
You brought that for me?
Yeah. You're always giving me treats.
Is it
You're in the middle of your thing. I didn't want to. It's pie. Yeah, it's pie.
All right. We have a new protege. Yeah. I want to point out that at the activity sheet, at the very top, we have instructions for it's a self-enrollment class to get into this Canvas sandbox. As long as you have a UW-Net ID, and maybe if you have any sort of system type ID, I don't know if it works or not, but you should be able to enroll and get a live version of this activity sheet. This is important for a couple of reasons. One is all of these links work. All of these links don't work in the paper version. So that's a big thing. There's a lot of information on that sheet. You can also open up the sheet in a new window. That's what sort of we can start off with. That's a good practice. If you have something embedded, also put a link to it so that people don't have to work on this small screen. They can open it up and see the full version of it.
like that.
Oh, and most importantly, at the very bottom of this, we have lab notes. So you all have editing rights. You get to this, you can get in there just like Karen just did. And as points come up, add your questions, add your notes. If you have a resource that you're like, oh, you should check out this online resource, 10 tips for online teaching, put a link to it. And that'll help us all out and help document. All right, so why are we here? Who are we? Why are we here? Let's get some things on the board. Who would like to start?
I'll start.
All right, Karen.
I'm Karen Spader. I am a doctoral candidate in curriculum and instruction, and I study online learning at higher education level, which explains why I'm here. I have many a year experience in teaching online, and as I've already stated, for the past 4 years, I've been studying online learning. So I'm not going to share any topics because I'm more on the tip side of the board.
All right, very good. Cliff or Mallory?
I can go for both.
Very good.
I'm Mallory. I'm a learning technology consultant. I mostly work with people who are using technology to develop courses, not only online but face-to-face. But I also have a lot of experience being an instructional designer and developing online courses. So I'm also more on the tip side of the board if you want to ask about anything.
All right, excellent.
I'm Frank Rooney from mathematics, and I'm just here to learn because I really don't know much about these things together, but I'd like to.
Okay,
And that department's eventually in there. when I finally read them up.
I'm gonna put math online here, because that can be a tricky thing with equations, right?
Okay.
There, I'll pull something out of you.
I'm Adam Mednick. I actually work for the State Department of Natural Resources and will be a first-time lecturer this summer in an environmental studies class. And I'm kind of terrified. And I learned about this whole thing, I think, a day or two ago. And so this is the first one I'm checking out. I'm not planning to do online teaching, but just want to see how this one goes.
Okay, and a lot of the tips for online teaching also work in face-to-face in a blended format, so that's good.
I'm Eric Pelosa. I'm an instructional designer with UW Extended Campus, and all of our courses and programs are online, so we focus just on the online realm. So the question I have is I'd like to hear from faculty about the transition to online teaching and kind of what helped them, what were their kind of perceptions and stuff like that. I just found out yesterday I'm working with a brand new faculty that's been assigned I'm working with, and they said right off the bat that they don't trust online teaching. So I'm hoping to get some insights to see what worked for other faculty, what was helpful for them to kind of buy into online teaching and stuff like that.
Great. Good, all right.
I'm Lori Berry. I work with Eric at UW Extended Campus, and I'm an instructional designer working with faculty too to put courses fully online. And so offering any suggestions or anything. I'm actually working with a math faculty, and I have a couple of ideas. They work for the former college's extended camp or whatever they call.
Colleges online.
Colleges online, so campuses, and worked with a few of them, translating math to online and just offering some ideas for that. So it can be done. It's a little tricky, but it can be done.
I'm Abby Letek. I'm a graduate student in sociology. I lecture a course in person now, but I fully anticipate that at some point in my career I'll be teaching something online. So I'm trying to be proactive.
Wow, nice.
Kenny?
My name's Kenny. I'm a grad student in the kinesiology department, and I think I'm most interested in avoiding burnout with online courses. So I've worked with a couple summer courses and start off strong, and then they just dive.
So burnout from the student perspective. not
Yes,
faculty.
yes, right. The student burnout.
Okay. Although faculty burnout is just as valid.
Yes. But they don't
Put
know
those
it.
down. Yeah, that's, yeah. Whew. All right. Laura.
I'm Lauren Rosen. I have been working with blended and online courses in world languages for over 20 years. So I've seen kind of lots of different models, and I'm mostly here also to provide tips of what we've learned from our mistakes over the past 20-some years.
Excellent. I'm gonna need another whiteboard.
I'm Kevin Forgard. I'm currently instructional designer for WIDA over at Wisconsin Center for Education Research, right over by CNI. And I was an instructional designer for 5 years for UW Colleges Online, and I worked with a lot of STEM courses. Lori's stealing my ideas from math courses. No, just kidding. So I've worked with math courses all the way up through differential equations, and had some really interesting ways that I can add to that. But what I'm really interested in discussing is thinking of how can we use Canvas, how can we extend Canvas vanilla into being something more? Is what type of tools and things. I know that's been a focus of other active teaching labs, but it's worth bringing up here.
All right, so this is for other tools, integration.
Yeah, integrations, whatever.
Okay. All right, Chelsea.
I'm Chelsea. I am a graduate student in the psychology department, and I work with Morton Gernsbacher, who is a really awesome resource for online education. She's currently watching on the online stream. And so I've been working with her since 2016 on online courses, and so I'm kind of, I guess, on the tip side of things, even though I'm a graduate student. I've got a lot of experience with kind of online education and how to make online education more inclusive for all students. So, I guess, yeah,
Inclusive.
inclusivity.
James.
James McKay, I'm on the Learning WT as Learning Technology Consultant with Mallory and Fifth.
I also have a history PhD and have taught online history courses and work a lot with history faculty at USC who are making their courses online.
Okay.
Hi, Kevin Thompson. I'm with Hewitt Academic Technology and instructional designer. Something I'm curious about, is that kind of
Yes.
I'm always curious about what works for students, what doesn't. Checking our assumptions, checking on ways we've always done things to where we could do things. Just constantly trying to talk more with students and learn what their preferences are and what works best for them.
I'm going to put check assumptions under this transitioning to online. And Margaret?
I'm Margaret, and I'm a grad student at the iSchool, and I work with John here in the active teaching lab. So that's fun, but I also want to say that Karen Skiba is online.
Hi, Karen.
Hi, Carrie.
Excellent. Kari?
Kari, and I was at Pi Day, and I'm sorry I'm late.
Where's the time?
Yeah.
3139. Comp side, $5. Sorry.
Bye.
Also, I have to leave early, so it's not that I'm heavily disagreeing with whoever is being said at the time. But I can pretend like it is if that's nice discussions.
I could have brought you some time.
Not.
Kari, do you have any
I wish it was
questions
five.
or topics, subtopics that you want to make sure that we address?
Pretty much just interested in hearing what instructors and yes.
Okay, excellent. You're here to observe. Cliff?
Cliff Cunningham, work with academic technology along with a couple others here. Two things I thought of specifically was academic integrity, kind of questions about how do you quiz, how do you, if it's truly online, fully online, how do you manage that? I actually had a support call from a faculty member last semester who caught, no, that's right, it's the beginning of this semester, so it was a couple months ago, but shortly after, and she caught some very interesting people who had driven distances to get together and collaborate when they were taking quizzes they should not have been taking together. And how do you avoid it? The other one was just
Or incorporate.
pardon?
Or incorporate.
That's right. Or that's right. And or the other one was can you have conversations online? I mean, the technology, like people stepping on each other and cutting each other off and not hearing, and it's this jilted. You almost have to say over every time at the end of your sentence and sort of release the microphone. I'm like, hey, what's a good way, if at all, to manage an actual online conversation?
Citizen banned online
Yeah,
discussions.
yeah, that's right.
All right.
Breaker.
I'll put that down as discussions. And I want to, again, emphasize that on our activity sheet, any resources that you have on any of these topics that you're like, oh, you know what? I should share that about this. Just add it. Go ahead and add it. And that way we'll have it forever. Discussions. Okay. Let's talk about transitioning to online and checking our assumptions. How many of you have either yourselves or have heard from other people, ooh, online is scary, it's not personal. I will tell you that I, for one, I love the this. And I think, well, in an online space, I don't have this. It's just, you know, me with the shadows under my eyes, the dim light of the laptop, you know, alone in my room, whatever. And it's sad, right? It's a sad assumption that I have. So yes, other people have heard that. And those of you who have been teaching for a long time, how much of that is true? To what extent? Learn.
Depends on how you handle it.
Okay.
From the
could
very
well
beginning, and this
be.
is where tips come in, I guess.
All right.
So a couple of tips that have worked really well for my instructors. I call it the little black book, but it doesn't necessarily have to be paper. And the idea is whenever you get any kind of personal information from a student, you have a page for each of those students and you write it down. So that way you have it as a reference. And, you know, if you find out that their dog is sick, somewhere down the road, you can say, hey, how's your dog doing? So then you've made kind of a personal connection. And if their grandmother dies 4 times in the semester, you know that too. That doesn't usually happen. But and then the other thing is within the first week, if possible, of the semester, have students sign up for like a 5 or 10 minute chat with you over video conferencing, whatever tool you want. And the reason for that is it builds that personal connection from the very beginning that you can oftentimes get in a classroom, so that they'll actually come to your virtual office hours and you'll be more of a human to them and not just some body behind some text that they've never really connected with. So I think it's really important from the very beginning to start some of those personalized pieces.
I think excellent idea in asking about them. We know that the University of Central Florida has found out that in their online courses and in their face-to-face learning courses, one of the biggest indicators of success is when students say, my instructor cared about me. And that's hard to do in an online space because you don't see their faces. Oftentimes, people won't have, that little account icon there, so you wouldn't be able to put a name to a face even if you did see them. So figuring out who they are, what they're.
And that's one of the first things that I encourage people to do in Canvas is have all of their students and themselves fill out their profile. So you do get a face.
And if they fill out the profile, you get maybe a little bit more self-representation, what they want to share, not, what people just assume by the way that I look or whatever. So yeah, it's an opportunity for that. So tracking the students. Would somebody be willing to add these things to the tips, or the tips to this? Excellent. Thank you. Other things about transitioning, ideas, tips, fears, ways to alleviate the fear in instructors.
I can add to this. We have to think of teaching online as not putting the classroom on computers. It's a very, very different medium. And I think who said that medium is the message. It kind of gets into that. I mean, so we have to think of this. A big mistake instructors I've worked with over the years is they think, oh, let's just record my lectures and put them online. I'll do exactly the same thing I've been doing in a face-to-face course and do that online. It doesn't translate. However, there's still the same types of activities and interactions. It just takes being a little creative.
So in instructional technology, certainly in K-12 and increasingly in higher ed, there's a SAMR model, substitution, augmentation, modification, redefinition. And I think you're right. Our first instinct, and it's a natural one, is to say, I did this in a face-to-face, how do I do the same thing in an online version? And eventually we say, oh, I can do these other things in it. And then it's like, why am I even doing this thing? This is a dumb thing. Let's do this totally different thing and modify it completely. And then redefine what's possible with that. So that's one way to think about that, moving up that model. James.
Maybe to take that and bridge to another question about transition for faculty, I do wonder, particularly for a faculty teaching online for the first time, how hard should you push for the higher levels versus, this is going to be an iterative process. You're going to stub your toe a lot. The first time isn't going to be perfect. So, okay, maybe the first time we are okay with just recorded lectures, as long as we understand that the end goal is we're going to be moving away from that.
I'm going to say start simple.
Yeah, and even in a case like that where an instructor just wants to record their lectures, you can still be active and chunk their lectures into 5-minute intervals. So you can work with a faculty who's kind of stubborn, who doesn't want to put in a lot of extra work, and still make it more usable to an online student.
So this makes me think of working with math faculty, how it's let's record working through specific problems, but then going even further is what are the sticking points? So it's within a particular chapter or unit there, there's 2 or 3 problems that students traditionally always have. So it's really focusing on those and having those kind of permanently as part of the course materials for that unit. Then you can reuse them semester after semester.
Wait, how do you do that?
There are a couple different ways. You can use, you can just use a camera on a chalkboard. I mean, there's we have laptop cameras. You can do that way. You can use your phone.
Okay, so identifying in the past, from past classes, what are the sticking points, and then focusing on that.
Well, yeah, so identifying where the sticking points are, you can look at kind of your personal experience. And also if we're using like a homework system, that we have analytics, so we have some data that we can use, that we know that there's a drop-off point in particular problem sets. And that can be very scientific about it. But a lot of faculty I work with, their experience of teaching, just teaching in general, they know here's what students have problems with.
And if they don't know automatically, you can
Ask.
always ask.
Yeah.
And again, by asking and saying, what are the sticking points, you're showing that you care about them, which will increase their success at this as well. You have more, yes?
Another piece is organization. If you are not an organized human being in general, don't teach an online course. You can never be too organized for an online course, and you can never link in too many ways to something that your students need to get at. So don't think, well, I created this assignment so it's in the calendar because it has a due date, that's sufficient. Put links in multiple places because your students you don't know what direction they're going to go when they get into Canvas to get to your content. So you can never have enough places and that gets to the accessibility stuff too.
And I think that if I can channel Martin, if she's listening, she might call this direct traffic, where she would say, make sure that they know where to go. And whether it's by giving them multiple options or taking away all of the options so that you can only follow a single path. Am I right?
That's one of the things that we do in the courses that I work with Morton, is we really direct traffic in one way. Students can only access this information in one way, so they're not, trying to go a roundabout way to get to the information. Or so the way that our courses are set up is there's a course website and then there's a Canvas page. Students never actually go to the Canvas page directly. They are linked to the Canvas page from our course website. And so every single time, they never actually, when they go into Canvas, they don't actually see anything. They don't have any options. They don't have any of that. All they can see really are their grades, the grade book, and the other students, basically, they can interact with them through that. But they go to this course website and everything is linked from there. So it's very streamlined. They don't have to search for anything in Canvas. Everything's very accessible for them right in that format.
I thought I had a tab up linking to one of the websites that Martin shared, but maybe somebody can add it to the bottom of our activity sheet. They're beautiful sites. The other way is in Canvas itself, turn these things off. Go to settings and take away all of the things that you're not using. This is a bad example because I've got everything turned on because we look at it, right? But
yeah, all you can see is the home and the grade book. That's
people.
I think that they can see people. I don't actually see what they see anymore, but they might not. They don't even need that function because the way that the course is set up, their chat groups and all of that is all based off of that website. They access their chat groups from there,
and part of that directing traffic is if you take these away, you can still access the functions in the page via links. So if you have group one, you can have a link to group one with a hyperlink here, and that way they don't have to go in and see the people and then find the groups and do all of that extra stuff. So simplify it for the students. So organize direct traffic. I'm going to add simplify as well. Others. We haven't talked a lot about helping the faculty who are afraid. How can we reassure the faculty? What we've said is, don't teach.
Unless you're organized.
It makes it scarier.
I think it's really important to be honest with faculty about how long it takes to develop an online course. You have to change their mindset that you can't just make your lecture the night before, then go into a classroom and present it to people. So being honest about the amount of time they should be spending every week developing the course, and then starting early so that they're not rushing with 1 month left. I know all the instructional designers in here are probably like, oh yeah, nobody actually does the work as early as they're supposed to, but they're really sad that they didn't when it's the last month before the course starts. So that would probably be, that's the way that I would get through to faculty a lot of times, is just being honest with them that you have to put the work in, because it's not like teaching a face-to-face class. You have to be done before the class even starts.
And I'm guessing that Karen Skiba, if she's watching, she's going to say exactly the same thing. Yes. And I want to also do a plug for the Teach Online at UW course. Karen sent me a slide and I forgot to put it in my intro slides. Sorry, Karen. But I believe that they're taking applications for the next round of that. If you will ever be teaching in the next year or so an online course, it is a fantastic resource that steps you through the transitioning from your face-to-face blended course into an online course. And this is, I think, the point that, yeah, it's sometimes easier to start with what you have already, but then recognize that it's going to change because the affordances of the online space are different. And just about everybody who I've spoken to who's transitioned from a face-to-face course into an online course says it made my face-to-face course better because it forced me to be organized and to think about things ahead of time in ways that in a face-to-face course I can just fake it, right? We get away with a lot in face-to-face courses. Kevin.
I think one of the tremendous benefits of the Teach Online program, just to piggyback on that, is that instructors have a chance to experience what it is like to be in an online course. And I think the empathy building that creates, and just realizing the self-motivation that is required to keep track of due dates and understanding the importance of feedback and timeliness and what it means to collaborate with other students on a group project. You can't really substitute that without experiencing it firsthand. And that's really what one of the huge benefits, I think, of the Teach Online program.
In the role of a student.
In the role of a student.
In the role of a student.
Yeah.
Because if you set out to, teach your first fully online course and you yourself have never been in a fully online course, it's very different.
Mm-hmm.
So experience it yourself. And I think that's, if you're transitioning, sign up for some of these free, massive, open online courses and see what it's like. Experience how horrible it is to take a bad one and the few bright spots where it's like, oh, they did this well. I'm going to steal this idea. And think about how you can steal the idea. If you should, if it'll apply appropriately to your course, or maybe it won't work. It's a good idea that would work in this class, but not in this other class. All right?
There's a tendency to create a course and a half, not meaning to. And so, because you have so much information, and so then you try and teach all of it, and you really can't, because just because it's online doesn't mean suddenly everybody has more time to do the work. And the flip side of that is, so for example, in languages, it's common that there's only 25 to 30 students in a class, which I know is very small for most of you. But we have to look at oral proficiency assessments. And we can't suddenly, because the course is online, handle oral proficiency assessments for 100 students in the same amount of time as we did before. And I would think a 150-person lecture can't suddenly be a 300-person lecture and you get to the same proficiency of whatever the content is, because suddenly you've got twice as many students to work with. So
limiting your scope.
Both ends of that, you have to be really careful. And a lot of administrators don't realize that. And so they're like, oh, it's online. We'll suddenly make it, as gigantic as many people want to join. And well, that's great for getting tuition dollars. But unless they're going to give you the support that you need to have additional people helping with grading and reviewing the content that the students are submitting, that doesn't really work.
It also ties back to the idea of directing traffic. If you have too many places to go, I'm totally guilty of, let's put all of the information that I can find and curate into this, and that way they have the freedom and they have the choices to be able to go to these different places. But what I recognize that does is it causes a lot of chaos. They aren't sure what parts they should go to or they need to go to, because what's going to be on the test. And they will, it's exasperating for a lot of people. So I think that's a part of it.
I don't know how popular this idea would be, but I think it kind of gets into developing kind of a strategy within department, within the institution for what we're going to do with online. And I mean, it could be as far as having a template course that we can hand over to a new instructor and say, here, or take your copying a colleague's course. They've successfully been, I don't know, have you done that before? Or a colleague asks you, oh, can I use your course? And having this, this sharing type of culture. But it's thinking that, a lot of these same issues, I think, if we just keep reinventing the wheel every course for every instructor, it ends up creating a lot of extra work.
And
But-
it takes a lot of the guesswork out of it for new instructors, where you can put and kind of embed into a template course good pedagogical practices for teaching online, and then it's like they don't even have to think about it; they just write learning.
I don't want to teach. I don't want to teach his course. I want to teach my course.
Right, so you lose the creativity, but it's better.
It's wonderful to have these sharing forums where, like the active teaching lab, right? We're going to the James.
But to this point, this is actually something we've done in the history department where we explicitly organized a group. It's broadly pedagogy and tools, but it's mainly to support those who are teaching online. They get together once a month. They're sharing, they're presenting. I copy courses in Canvas from previous people who taught online to give people access so they can see, oh, this is how this colleague did it. So it really does, I think, having that departmental conversation, because how you teach a history course online, well, very similar, is going to have some significant differences to teaching a math or a STEM course online.
And to the point of having template course shells sort of available, you can look back at a previous active teaching lab on the Canvas course templates that we've collaborated on with Karen Skibb at VCS to try to speed up that process of just getting a course started. Some sample home pages, some sample module structures, sample course orientation module, just to kind of get the ball rolling, fill in some placeholder text, at least get into it a little bit more quickly than starting from scratch.
Piggyback off of successes. Yeah, find examples and the sharing with colleagues. Excellent. Let's talk about the burnout, because one of the things with the course and a half that I heard or that I thought about was it's different than a face-to-face course because it can be a lot more work because you have to make individual connections with each of your students. In a face-to-face class, I can say something, and if I see you nodding, I will say, congratulations, John, I've connected with these 5 people because they all nodded with me, right? I've made a connection. I know that they're listening because I can watch that. In a face-to-face course, you don't necessarily have that feedback built in. And if you build it in, it can be sometimes very onerous because now you have to go back and respond to every one of their, the discussion posts from at least every person at least once. That's a lot more work than it is in a face-to-face course. So what are some strategies for making that easier? Karen?
Don't do that.
All right.
Totally don't do that.
Right.
Don't think you're gonna do that. Don't think that you're going to respond to everything. It not only will cause burnout, it's also not good strategy for helping online learners learn. Or connect with each other, which arguably is more important, both in terms of their learning, but also in terms of takeaway, like bigger picture takeaway. So I think one thing from the student perspective, like practical advice, is to give interest-driven opportunities for students to demonstrate their understanding of the material. One of the biggest problems with student burnout is because it's information overload. And we shouldn't, good teaching is not just about delivery of information, and 21st century learning shouldn't be about consumption of information. We have access to information all at our fingertips, literally and figuratively. And so I think trying to be creative, and this I do recognize will depend on discipline, although I think that there's creative options in all disciplines. But finding some creative ways to trigger is not the right word, but trigger student interests so that their particularly like project ideas are motivating for them because it's developing their own interest or pursuing their own interest in some way. So I think that's one thing. So I'll be quiet and let them.
Personal connection. And this is universal design for learning. We all learn differently. We all have different hooks. We all have different ways of understanding things, the more options we have to connect whatever the content area is with our own personal experiences, skills, interests, passions, those of our family, those of our community, those of our lived experiences. In many ways, the better. The trick with that, of course, is that if you have 400 different options and 400 different students, it's going to make your life unbearable. So organizing those within a central, broad enough framework or rubric where that can be possible is key to that, I think.
Well, I wanted to add to that because that also gets at the academic integrity. So if you're adding some variety in there where it's more authentic, it's more personalized, you're going to move away from like a standardized quiz or test, and there could be cheating involved in that. So it's really bringing them into the assessment versus just, oh, I'm going through the motions and I'm not engaged enough. And so I think that can add to that too.
Absolutely. I'm so glad that you talked about that, because if you are just transferring information for them to consume and spit back at you, then it's not meaningful to them, and it encourages them to, let's get together and do this together, because it's the same for all of us. And it doesn't necessarily apply to what my individual dreams and whatever are. Not that every course that you teach or have to teach or that will be taught online will be fitting people's dreams and aspirations. Margaret?
Say Lauren Sue has joined, and her question is, can you give an example of what you mean by interest-driven?
Oh, yeah, interest-driven. Karen?
Well, I mean, I guess interest is a relative term to some respect, but it's what people connect with. So I like to have students connect projects to their career path. So I have a tendency to teach in the gen ed kinds of courses, not necessarily major kinds of courses. So asking students to find the connections between what they're going to be doing in their career and the course content that I'm teaching to them, or just kind of like a contextual frame surrounding a project that's rooted in what their interests are, and it could be career or personal. But giving them choice rather than saying, here's your project, write a research paper on X concept. Think a little bit bigger. Think about how giving them opportunities to pick concepts. There's nothing worse than having to read however many of the same exact report. That also connects back to faculty burnout. That variation not only will be more motivating and interesting and valuable to students, it also will be more interesting to the faculty as they go through that process of grading.
It can also be as simple as think about your students, and you'll all recognize this. They often approach schooling as a game. What are the things I need to do? What are the things I don't need to do? Do I need to really focus on this, or is it worth too low of a point value that I should really otherwise focus on this other thing? So they have these motivations based on time, life balance, all of those things. Can you connect your content with other courses that they're taking? Because if you can do that, that's a win for that other course and a win for your course. And they're saying, oh, I'm just doing one thing of study, killing two birds, one stone. Academic integrity, anybody? This is a thing that people in the past have often said, oh, wait, you can't write that paper. You can't hand in this paper that you've written for this into this course as well, right? You have to do a new paper for that. And I think there's something to that. But at the same time, if I do research for this topic that I'm interested in, and I can write a paper for this class and write a paper on a different angle of it for this other class, I'm saving myself 50% of the research that I would have had to do on some other topic that maybe I'm not interested in. So again, ask them, involve them in helping you solve how to do your course well and how to succeed.
I think another way to do that on a little bit smaller scale, so more like an assignment-based scale, is to just like provide options within an assignment. Like, which one of these topics interests you the most? And now you should write about, like, do you want to look into good web design? Do you want to look into what CAPTCHAs are and how do they work? Like, that's an example of something that students would do in our class, where they can sort of like choose your own adventure within a specific assignment where they're all getting at the same general concept, learning the same sorts of material just through a different focus on that topic. So it allows them to like reflect on why did I choose that topic? Why is that important to me or interesting to me? And getting across, the same sort of information in a different maybe way.
And in there's a 2013 article, what works and what doesn't. It's a meta-analysis of over 700 scientific articles on 10 common learning techniques to identify the most advantageous ways of studying. One of the big ones is this idea of reflection, both with self-testing, distributed practice throughout the course, revisiting the content over and over again, elaborative interrogation. This is the one that I think is closest to reflection. What did I learn here? Why does it work this way? Things like that. And I think that part of that is, why do I care about this? That actually shows up in a different article. I will link this eventually to the course, but when you have the students self-generate the utility value of their content and force them to assign them to do this, make this personal for 5 points or whatever. And then they start saying, oh, this is valuable for me for this reason. They do it on their own, it's better. All right. We have 15 minutes left. We talked a little bit about avoiding burnout for faculty. I want to add to that, groups are really good for providing student-to-student feedback. It's hard, again, and not necessarily good for you as an instructor to give everybody feedback, because that leads to a lot of faculty burnout. But we need feedback. We need to know, we do these self-checks, these knowledge checks. And sometimes our peers or other students can do that. And as instructors, you can facilitate that. So that helps.
I'd like to add to the student issue too, in that depending on this, okay, sure, technically, depending on the size of your class, if you had a 5-person class, you'd be all right, but group people up, have the whole process be with a shared group. I see cohorts that create a cohort.
Yeah.
Having the biggest problem I've seen with large classes online is that there's one discussion board that everybody's in and it's a hot mess and it's confusing and Canvas is a terrible arrangement functionally. And so by having students with small groups moving through content, again, here I'd plug again, interest, grouping students by interests, whether it's major or something else, will give them a shared identity from the beginning and they'll more likely find that connection with each other. I'm not a fan of randoms grouping. I'm not necessarily a fan of self-grouping either by students because if they have some kind of common identity, I'll say common academic identity, let's just put it there. I think that they're going to be able to, well, at least in my experience, I've seen that they're able to dig a little deeper and their ideas feed off of each other. But yeah, so if you want to have bigger ideas being shared, start with small group discussions, and then one person from their small group posts some kind of summary post, whatever it is you have them doing, to a larger one, so it's fewer.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I would say group sizes 4 to 6 is ideal.
And in groups, roles are really good ways to organize and to give people jobs to do, so that they are involved. All right. Transitioning online, done. Math online. Let's talk a little bit about that, since we have some experience and thoughts in the room. I heard pictures. Somebody said take pictures, and this is an easy way to solve the I can't get this formula thing, or I don't know how to learn the tech in Canvas. Does that even work? I don't even know. It doesn't in Canvas, but you can do it in other things.
What does it?
It's like a math coding.
Well, that's, I think that's what, I thought it did. I thought that was the name of the coding that is available. There is a.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay. the tech works, but then you still have to have your students learn it, which is probably a good skill to have if you're gonna be in math, right? Or several other STEM sciences.
Yeah, and I would want to point out too that there's a pretty big accessibility concern with just taking pictures of stuff and posting it in your course, so don't highly recommend just doing that.
From
in
the
any course.
instructor perspective, for sure, and in as any student to student learning perspectives, yes.
Well, yeah, in any situation, if you can't put alt text, which I don't think Canvas necessarily allows all the time, then you shouldn't put a lot of pictures in your course.
So you're referencing what the instructor does, not what a
Not
student
what's
does to
presented.
post their work.
I think, yeah, and I think it should apply in both cases, but I guess an instructor would know if they have a disability.
If they have a disability, they can't get those
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Other tips for math?
I think just math discussions, I think, it gets into kind of like what we're saying here. Like, they have to be sort of student driven. And the way I kind of see it is akin to, as we see so many people, they look to how they're playing a video game. They want to know how to get past a certain level in a video game. What do? They go to YouTube. Or academic example is they go to Khan Academy. How do I do this?
Yeah.
So it's creating that same time. I mean, there's no one incentivizing them to create that community. So it's creating that type of structure within course discussions. And sometimes it has to be scaffolded in the sense of, all right, your assignment is to post a problem that you have solved that you were proud of. I mean, we started this with Calc 1, which is a challenging course for a lot of students. Here, look, I figured this out. Here's how I did it. But at the same time, you could say, I'm completely stuck on this problem. And then people jump on it, kind of like we're doing here. So it's creating this sense of community within solving the math problems. It isn't just like, here's your problems this week, good luck, see you at the midterm. It's, hey, how did you do on this? So it's trying to mimic that, but without saying your grade is this, and you have to post this many times and respond this many times, because then that just creates an artificial conversation.
And Piazza is a really good external tool, speaking now about
Better than
extended
Canvas
Canvas,
was.
that facilitates that, where they work together on solving a really wicked problem.
Yeah.
And it's one, it's real and authentic, hopefully, that they can't solve individually, so they have to come together and work on it. And at any point, the instructor can come in and say, you're on the right track, keep going, or this is it, congratulations. And that congratulations goes back to that care about them and to take notice of what they're doing and where they're struggling. Because many times in Piazza, you can sort of see that thread go on and see, they show their work through that thread oftentimes. So that's kind of a fun way to do that. Eric?
Another thing I think too with math courses is not to rely too much on like third-party platforms. Like I know there's a lot of good services out there like MindTap or Math Excel that are great for students to take like unlimited practice sessions because there's a lot of answers, question banks there. But I worry sometimes if you rely too much on that, like students are buying access to this platform.
Yes.
Are they actually doing any work in the course? What service are we providing the students? So I think
Algorithmic generated, and then they get good at that, but not actually doing math.
Yeah.
And let's talk then about extending Canvas, because here's where I'm going to throw in a really big official disclaimer. There's all kinds of stuff involved in using external tools, right? It's got to go through the university lawyers and the cybersecurity and the privacy, and maybe there's a cost to it. There's tracking of student information, perhaps. All of these things. I think a couple of years ago, and I was part of this, it was a wild west out there. Let's try this tool. Let's try this tool. And times have changed now as we find out more and more about privacy violations and leaks and things like that. So it's going back to this idea of starting simple and maybe keeping things simple is sometimes a good idea. That said, there are fantastic tools and apps and things out there all the time. And even if they're not supported, they can provide really good learning. That's a thing you need to negotiate sort of in an unsupported way, though. But in a very careful way. Laura, do you have things to say about this?
I'm the queen of incorporating things that haven't been legally approved yet. I realize that. For any course that where there's value in any type of oral discussion, that's an online course, Flipgrid, which was created by University of Minnesota and is currently owned by Microsoft, is a really good oral discussion board. It's actually video based. And I today, in fact, was in communications with Flipgrid and the folks at System. We're trying to get it to be an approved thing, but there's an interoperability agreement, something that they don't want to sign because Microsoft doesn't sign these things, but somehow we have 365, so trying to get to the bottom of that. But
Yeah.
it is Microsoft owned, so.
And there are all kinds of
It should be-
examples of that, and all kinds of should be's and why isn't, and things like that.
But I highly recommend Flipgrid for any type of, and the format is literally a discussion board, but video based.
And if I may, I'm gonna actually piggyback on, as a member of the AT, academic technology, we are having conversations all the time, and actually we have a single person deployed for the express purpose of helping find the smoothest way to get from point A to point B with all of these third-party tools that are being requested. So as you get into the world and you begin to see this delicious orchard of product that can be brought to the table for your students, please know, man, please connect with the academic technology. The Learning UW team can put you in, help you do some quick first level analysis and make sure that you're not signing away the farm unwittingly when you think you're just getting this cool little neat tool. So.
Let's talk about inclusivity. I think especially in an online situation where we don't have that face-to-face nonverbal feedback, we can sometimes lose out on, are we forgetting people? Are they getting lost in the pixels or ether? Thoughts on that? Joe?
Yeah, so I think one of the big things is creating that sense of community within your students first and foremost, because they are a support system kind of within one another in their course. If they can make a connection with one or two other students on like a more personal level. So in our course, students are divided up into discussion board groups, which are 7 to 9 students, and then within that are broken down into chat groups, which is a more personal, either 2-person or 3-person chat group. And they talk one-on-one every single week through a text-based chat. So it kind of takes away that maybe like scary, I need to talk face to face with somebody. It makes it a lot more inclusive for a student who might have trouble talking up in a group like this, or talking in a small group or even a large group. And so kind of creating a sense of community within the larger discussion board. And then you can come in and facilitate that as a instructor or a teaching assistant. And so then you can start to make those connections where you see like, okay, in their group chat this week, somebody brought up that, they have this going on in their life, and you can kind of latch onto those moments as an instructor that maybe they wouldn't have come to you with that problem or issue or something like that, but they're more likely to talk to another student about it, and you can pick up on those things and adjust your course or talk to those students. And so it just creates, I think, a better environment for your students if they kind of have a connection with at least 2 other people in what can be a big course. I mean, like you think about an in-person course of 135 students, that's what our online course is. Like, what kind of realistic connections are they making with other students in an in-person class? Are they making connections with even one other student in that class? Maybe not. And so being able to facilitate that, I think, is really huge for allowing them to do well in the course.
Those, correct me if I'm wrong, let me ask, pose that as a question. Are those facilitated? Are those structured in a way, or is it just, hey, let's chat this week?
So they are structured. It's one of our assignments every week, and what they're doing is they're reflecting on course material that they've worked on. So they have 6 assignments every week, and this is assignment 5 of 6. And so they've already done 4 assignments. Typically, they have to go in and do some sort of work ahead of time. They come together, they talk about things in a similar way that a discussion section of an in-person course would. So you talk about an article or something like that, but those discussions are not physically facilitated by a teaching assistant or a professor. And so it's just student-based discussion in those. And then we go in and we grade kind of like, did they touch on the talking points, and were there any, sticky points that we can go back and kind of bring up with students? Like, were they voicing a concern or something like that? So.
And that gets back to the directing traffic, you give them clear instructions on how to do that, so they're not like, hey, what do you want to talk about?
Yeah, but the great thing is you see these students that like halfway through the semester, they change chat groups, and that's what's actually happening right now. And they're really sad to leave their group because they've made such really great connections, and they're like, oh man, like, did you guys realize this is our last chat? Like, oh, it's just such a bummer. Like, you know, and they're like, oh, like, text me in the group chat. Like, let's get together outside of this course. And so you're not only facilitating like a great relationship within the course, you're helping them make larger connections on campus, which is really huge for just student success outside of your class as well.
So it, one of the things was, one of the worries was in an online discussion, people interrupt, somebody put it about, the last thing we talked about, so where was it? Oh, it was you, I think. Online discussions, people stepping over each other's words and interrupting that. Do you see that?
No,
How do we,
not really. I think it's,
is that an issue?
I mean, in some groups it is where you might have like one person who kind of dominates the conversation a little bit, but you can catch that really early on and say, you know, like, I noticed that, like, so-and-so, you know, you didn't get to talk very much during the discussion. Like, let's come up with some creative ways that you can become more active in those group discussions or something like that. So you can kind of, without saying like, stop talking so much, like, or like, you need to talk more. It's like, you know, I noticed that, like,
tactful, professional response there.
yeah.
That's great.
Well, the other beautiful thing about the online discussions is you can type in what you want to say, double check it, triple check it, hit submit, and it shows up.
Well, exactly,
Nobody's
yeah.
going to cut you off in that because that just shows
Exactly,
up.
and that's true with the typing. I was more trying to envision
A
the
video.
actual live, either video or, yeah.
Blackboard.
dialogue. And I don't know
Yeah.
how often that happens, how often when you guys teach your online courses, are you actually dialing in to be there at a real moment in time? It may not happen that much. If it doesn't happen, then that's not an issue, but when you are trying to facilitate something like that, once you get past 4 or 5 people, it's a bear trying to give a fluid conversation.
And that's why we limit it to that 2 to 3 people, because more than that, yeah, within those small chat groups, because more than that, you lose out on people. They start to kind of like pull back, and you're just like, oh, this person said one thing throughout an entire hour-long conversation. Like, that's where you lose out.
I'm sad that our time is up. It's 2 o'clock. Thank you. This was a great discussion, I think. I think we got some really good information. Thank you for everyone else who's taking notes on this. On your way out, if you could just check a couple of boxes. If you have a topic idea, put it on the bottom. Any other comments that you'd like to add, please do. Help yourself to the rest of the fruit and coffee, and if you need a bag of ice, feel free to grab that and take it with you. And we have to work for the next half hour, so please continue